Substack. Mr. Hubbell's Substack newsletter began as he was trying to comfort his family as they, along with the rest of the nation, faced the tragedy of Donald Trump's election. Today's edition, as a daily email, was begun by Robert for his 3 adult daughters and his wife, and has now grown into over 70,000 subscribers. If you are like me, you look forward to reading Mr. Hubbell's thoughts every evening. We're going to monitor the chat box for questions, and we ask you that you stay muted. And I'm going to let Robert take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Robert Hubbell. First of all, for those of
you just went, you muted.
Okay, I will start over. Can somebody give me a thumbs up that they can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. My name is Robert Hubbell, and I'm an author of a newsletter on Substack. For those of you who are readers of mine who showed up in response to my promoting this event, thank you very much. I know you have a lot of competing demands on your time, and the fact that you chose to come tonight to learn about COIN and to hear what I have to say is honoring and humbling at the same time. I just also want to make certain that my audio is okay. Teresa's was a little in and out. So Beverly, everything's okay. All right, great. Let me give, I'm going to speak very briefly for 10 or 12 minutes. And I want to just put a little bit of gloss on how the newsletter got started. I assured my 3 adult daughters that there was no way in the world that Trump would win, that the adults in the room would emerge and ensure that he would lose. Obviously, he didn't, and it was devastating to my daughters and to my wife, all of whom, as women, you can understand, had a particular reaction to speaking to a misogynistic, crass bully, and they were afraid, rightfully so, for things like their personal liberties and their rights of free speech. And one of my daughters in particular, who was in Washington, D.C. at the time, was really very particularly affected. And so my wife and I flew out from Los Angeles, where we live, to comfort our daughter, to help stabilize her, to get her into counseling, to help stabilize her. And as part of that, when my wife and I returned home, it was pretty clear that none of my daughters were going to watch the news. They were going to disengage and withdraw. And we agreed that was not the best solution here. So my wife and I agreed that I would just send an email each night telling them what happened during the day, so that they would be connected, but still one degree of separation from having to witness the orange guy on television. And I started writing those nightly emails in late November 2016. In late January 2017, we sent it to 3 additional family members who had kind of the same reaction to Trump. And then from there, it got passed around, and it just grew. So now I have 50,000 subscribers in my database on Substack, and I'm between 90 and 100,000 views a day on Substack. So it's grown immensely, but what I have found is that its attraction is that many, many millions of Americans had the same reaction that my daughters did, which is that this is almost unthinkable. It's overwhelming. We can't believe that this is happening to us. It's hard to follow the news. It can be dispiriting. It can be confusing. It can cause despair. I've just continued to write the newsletter each night as if I'm writing it to my daughters. And that approach seems to touch people. And I want to start, and then I'll get to my formal remarks, by saying that every single day I hear from readers who tell me that today was the breaking point for them, that they just can't take it anymore, that they're going to turn off the news and cancel their subscriptions and stop following what's going on. And I understand that reaction. It's reasonable. In fact, it's very human. But but while we should protect ourselves emotionally, we also have to stay engaged. And I hope that my remarks tonight will convince you that there is a way, and there is a path, and you've already found it in part. So let me just start, and I want to make two comments before I get into my remarks. And the first is I absolutely firmly believe that Joe Biden is going to be reelected in 2024, that he's going to expand his margin of victory in the popular vote and probably in the electoral vote as well. So I want you to take my remarks with that as background. And then I want to start with a question, which I want you to keep in mind during my remarks. And that question is kind of open-ended, and it'll make sense later. The question is, so what would we do differently? What would we do differently? So I think before answering that question, talking about how we deal with the present moment is that first we have to recognize the particular challenge that we're facing at this point in time. And that challenge is that we have to keep our wits about us and remain motivated and hopeful and enthusiastic as we head into 2024. Why? And the answer is obvious. Morale matters. Just ask the leaders of COIN, ask the leaders of any organization whether morale matters, and they will say, of course it matters. But you know that. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. The challenge for us is maintaining that sense of hope and enthusiasm in the face of this incredible, incessant onslaught of made-for-TV polling and false equivalencies and whataboutisms that fuel the media and the social media. In a media world where the number of eyeballs and clicks and impressions define success, truth and balance are not only irrelevant, they are antithetical to the business model of the media. And there you have it. The media and social media succeed by emphasizing drama and conflict and division and fear, because they know that millions of years of evolution have fine-tuned our survival instincts to be on guard when those factors are present. So in recognizing the challenge, we have to recognize that the very goal, the aim of the opposition is to manipulate our emotions. It's to make us look and react and come back for more. Recognize that fact. Recognize that we are the target of a manipulation campaign. Put it in a box as an interesting sociological observation and just set it aside and just agree that we're not going to have, and this is not a knock on young, ambitious people, but we're not going to have a 20-something news producer who proves their worth by scaring us cause us to withdraw and retract from the urgent events that we face today. And that's what happened to my daughters in 2016 and 2017. They overcame that, but that's what happened. The second point I simply want to make is that facts still matter. At least they matter to enough people to make a difference. Don't consume yourself with anxiety about the MAGA extremists that you see on TV who believe that President Kennedy's still alive and he's going to be Trump's running mate and that Joe Biden's the head of an international pedophilia ring run by lizard people who live in the middle of the earth. I mean, people who support Donald Trump say those outrageous things as a way of affiliating themselves, as a way of cultural identification. It is a gang signal flashed between one another as they drive by. They don't mean it. They don't even know really what they're talking about when they support some of these wild things. So let's focus on this question as to whether facts matter. Joe Biden has been the most successful president in the last 50 years. He saved us from Trump. He saved us from a pandemic. He saved us from the Great Recession. And he passed some of the most far-reaching progressive legislation in a half century. And he did so with a 0-seat majority in the Senate and a 5-seat majority in the House. And look at what Kevin McCarthy is doing with a 5-seat majority. Talk to your friends and neighbors and ask them this. How many were Biden voters in 2020 who now are going to vote for Trump? And ask how many of them were Trump voters who are now going to vote for Biden. If even a handful of your friends have seen the light, that is all it's going to take to increase Biden's 8 million vote majority in the popular vote, because that phenomenon is being multiplied tens of millions of times across America. So people know what Joe Biden has done. Facts matter still to enough people to make a difference. The next point I want to make is that disinformation is the point. Republicans have been explicit in their strategy to flood the zone with disinformation. And why is that? Because it confuses the opposition. It dispirits people. It causes them to tilt at windmills of disinformation when they should be registering voters and helping people to get out the vote. Disinformation demoralizes people. Disinformation is the point. Recognize that fact as an interesting sociological observation, put it in a box, and just set it aside. Refuse to be manipulated by disinformation. And just one more point, and think about this. When the facts are against you, as they are with the Republican Party, disinformation is the last refuge of failing political parties. That's why Democrats speak the truth and Republicans rely on disinformation. So every time you hear another piece of disinformation, think to yourself, aha, they're doing that because they know the facts are against them. My next point is that sadly, the media is complicit. Not all media, but there is a very large overlap between the Republican need to resort to disinformation and the media's need to emphasize false drama, conflict, division, and fear. For all of the fact-checking that the media does, the headlines still promote disinformation by following the adage, if it bleeds, it leads. So there's this overlap between the Republican need to dissemble, to create conflict and fear, to demotivate us, and the media's need to sell soap. And so it all just comes crashing down on us. So let me just stop with all the negativity and say something that you already are living proof of, that action is the antidote to anxiety. Sitting at home, stewing in your anxiety and fear is counterproductive and it's wasteful. We need you. We need your commitment and your passion and your effort. Act, do, lead, speak, post, call, write, knock, and then repeat. Every one of those actions will make you feel better and will ensure Democratic victory in 2024. The next point is that community matters. This is a hard time. And we can't experience them alone. You know, you found COIN, that's terrific, or you found Indivisible, that's terrific. But there are thousands of other grassroots organizations out there that will also welcome you with open arms. Join them. Spend time in their backyards or on their patios or on Zoom. Make it a habit to get together with others. They will give you comfort and strength. And this is important. If you can be the one who gives comfort and strength to others, do it. We need leaders to inspire and lift others up. I won't share details with you, but I am shocked every day by the readers that I hear from, some of whose names you would recognize, who are feeling exactly like you and who are looking for someone to lift them up. You can be that person. One more point before I get to wrap up here, and that is perspective. Perspective is important. It is something that I emphasize with my daughters whenever I try to help put bad news into context. And when I write about perspective in the newsletters, some people misinterpret that and say, oh, you're saying that perspective means that everything doesn't matter. And I'm not saying that at all. Instead, what perspective does is it tells us that it's difficult for us to properly understand the scale and the seriousness of our challenges in the moment. We have to ground ourselves in the notion that we live in a vast and a diverse nation filled with hundreds of millions of people who want nothing more than to raise their families in peace and leave a better world for their kids. And the people you see on TV talking about lizard people and Hunter Biden and President Kennedy coming back from the dead, they are a fraction of a percent of those hundreds of millions of Americans in our vast country who want exactly what you do. And that backbone of America, the you of America, has endured civil war and world war. It survived shameful periods of enslavement and Jim Crow. Look, it survived a period where the wealthy elite in America backed Hitler. It survived the Great Depression and the Great Recession. It survived a march of 30,000 white-hooded Ku Klux Klansmen down Pennsylvania Avenue in 1925. We've survived all of that and more. And I'm here to tell you, we're going to survive Trump and we're going to survive MAGA extremism. America is bigger than Trump and his cultish acolytes. America will outlast them all. I'm not saying it will be easy. It's not going to be pretty. And it may very well get worse before it gets better. But it will get better and we will win. Our task is to hold the ramparts and the barricades for the next generation to pick up the standard and lead the way. We can do that. Our ancestors did that for us. Ours is not going to be the generation that falters, not with people like you who, if we multiply this meeting tens of thousands of times, are an army of 10 million people for democracy and freedom and liberty, all marching into 2024. So now, with all of that as background, let me get back to my question. What would we do differently? So I want to propose a thought experiment. Let's just suppose for a moment that all the horrible things that the media is telling us are true. Trump's 10 points ahead or 50 points ahead. Joe Biden's too frail to serve. Americans care more about Joe Biden's age than they do about Trump's treason and his betrayal of the Constitution. Young people and minorities have lost enthusiasm for the Democratic Party. That's what the press is telling us, because that's what Republican political operatives are telling the press. So let's assume that's all true. Okay. What would we do differently? Would we give up? Would we curl into a ball and pull the covers over our head and wait till it was all over? Would we move out of the US and give up on the greatest experiment in democracy in the history of the world? And or would we do exactly what we're doing? Would we organize and donate and agitate and defend democracy with every single ounce of effort we could muster? Would we do anything differently? And what if, heaven forbid, Trump wins? Do we declare that democracy is over, as many of our political pundits are telling us? Do we just give up? Not me. And I hope not you either. Since we wouldn't do anything differently if all this stuff that the media is telling us is true, or even if Donald Trump won, then we shouldn't obsess over all of that. We should focus on action. We should focus on the things that are going to affect the outcome. So be a leader if you can. Be in community with others who are hopeful, and just focus on changing the outcome, and don't worry about all of the negativity and the disinformation out there that is designed to take you down. As I often say in my newsletter, we have every reason to be hopeful, but no reason to be complacent. So those are my remarks. I hope they were helpful. And I'm now ready to take whatever questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hubbell. We had a question that was submitted earlier, following up on your last point. I understand the importance of morale for us as activists, but there are so many people out there who are just depressed by our polarized politics. They just don't want to be engaged at all. And so how do we as activists talk about politics in a way that gives people hope for the future?
Well, thank you for that question. It's an important one, and it's a difficult one, but I have two reactions to it. First of all, you're the solution. I mean, these are your friends and neighbors and the people in the grocery line behind you who you need to talk to. But by talk, I mean listen. Because a very wise piece of advice that my wife gives me from time to time is, don't tell me how to feel. We shouldn't tell anyone how to feel. We should ask them how they do feel and what makes them feel that way. And then lead them in a conversation that at least opens them to the possibility that voting in 2024 is one way in which their lives can be better. I just as an aside, my wife and I went up to our cabin in the Sierras, and we drive from Los Angeles through the San Joaquin Valley, which is a very conservative area. It's Kevin McCarthy's district up through there. And it's always a wild ride to talk with people about politics, where our cabin is and when we're going, to and from our cabin. So I was putting gas in my truck today, and I was at a stop in a town called Visalia, which is actually maybe in Devin Nunes's old district. And, there was a guy who pulled up in a big muscle car and, had sort of all the indicia of, I'm really a badass, don't mess with me. And I looked over and said, wow, that's a really nice car. He wouldn't stop talking. And, I was putting gas. I couldn't continue that conversation, but I started by just remarking on something that was important to him. And he didn't know who I was. He didn't know what my politics were. So as I say, it starts with us. It is our neighbors. I'm continually surprised when I'm in places where people find out that I write a newsletter, and they say, oh, can I see your can you send me your newsletter? And I always say, well, I'm not certain you'd like it. It's a very progressive newsletter. And people are like, oh yeah, I really want to see it now. And I have been surprised again and again and again. presumed that people were conservative in their views. So open yourselves up to those conversations. Biden will, I hope, win by 10 million votes or more. But as we all know, it's going to come down to tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of votes in a handful of states. So we don't have to affect the margins very much to ensure victory. And so every conversation, every vote that you flip is meaningful.
This is a question from the chat, and I also have this same issue with members of my family. You can go down a rabbit hole with all of these media stories and conspiracy theories and how to convince people that what they're reading isn't true, or at least not correct. And how do you help people get out of those false narratives without, leading yourself down a rabbit hole that you can't get out of and doesn't really lead you to anything productive?
So take my prior answer, and hopefully you'll be engaged in conversations where you listen a lot more than talk. But this might not be a very popular answer. They have to pull themselves out of that rabbit hole. And I think you have to, as a matter of self-preservation, recognize whether this is a soul that can be saved given the bandwidth that you have to help people or not. The world is not on your shoulders, and it is not going to rise or fall on whether you convince your Uncle Sid that he shouldn't support Trump. I think you should make a good faith effort and be open and accepting and listen. But look, if someone is willing to say, I don't know, pick the most outlandish conspiracy theory there is out there, if they're that detached from reality, I don't think that you're going to turn them around. There are people who are persuadable, and we should invest our energy in trying to persuade those people. I used the phrase in my remarks, we shouldn't be tilting at windmills of disinformation, nor do I think we should be tilting at trying to convince people who are unconvincible. We need to persuade persuadable independents. That should be our focus.
How do we deal with the issue or the concern about President Biden's age?
Well, how many of you know somebody who's 80 years old? How many of you think that person is incompetent merely because of their age, setting aside the question of recognizing that dementia is a real issue? I mean, nobody. I know 80-year-olds who are sharper and more vigorous than I am. This is a disinformation campaign that has sadly seeped into Democrats in a way that has undermined their confidence. Joe Biden is 80 years old. Does he act like an 80-year-old person? You betcha. What do we want? Do we want him to act like he's 50? Do we want? I'm 67, I think. I'm nowhere near as sharp as I was when I was 45 or 50 or 60. And getting old is natural. And it is just simply ageist to say old equals incompetent. Now, there is a legitimate question lurking in this age issue, and that's not how old President Biden will be when he's elected, but how old he would be at the end of his term. That's a legitimate question. It is one that applies with equal force to Donald Trump, who is less healthy, less mentally sharp than Biden. And so I think what's happened is because it is an easy, lazy story for the press to promote, they promote it. And it is a story that is used as a false equivalent for Trump's corruption. And the story usually goes like this. Sure, Trump attempted the first coup, and he withheld classified documents. But, Biden's old. Now, those two things are not even in the same universe, but it is what accounts for balance and fairness to the corporate owners of major media. And it is not. Those two things have absolutely nothing to do with one another. If you want to talk about Joe Biden's age and health, that's perfectly reasonable for people to do. But the apt comparative is Donald Trump's age and health, not his corruption. And that's the false equivalency that the media is setting up. And anytime anyone wants to talk about the age of the presidential candidates, fine. Talk about both of them, and Joe Biden wins that comparison every single time. I don't follow Trump on Truth Social, but I do follow people on Twitter who follow Trump on Truth Social. So I see Trump's post in their native format. Oh my God, they look like he's a crazy person. Now, they always have, but as I said in last night's newsletter, the pitch of madness is increasing. I mean, he used to use all caps on short posts. He uses all caps for 50 lines. I mean, there's something going on in someone's head who is screaming literally through social media at you for 50 lines of text. So, just keep the comparisons apt and don't allow corruption and coup attempt to be counterbalanced by Joe Biden's age. That's what I would say.
And this may also be the result, and probably is, of the false equivalencies from the media. But what about the lure of the third party to those who are either disillusioned with Trump or Biden or Democrats, like the no labels, Cornel West, those types of candidates?
Yeah, I think let me get to the punchline and then I'll talk about that a little bit. The punchline is it's on us to say to every single person who raises that a vote for a third party candidate is a vote for Trump. Do you want to vote for Trump? Don't talk about Cornel West. Don't talk about RFK Jr. Do you want to vote for Trump? And if the answer to that is no, then you must vote for Joe Biden and no one else. No Labels it's a fraudulent organization that is funded by MAGA extremist, dark money, MAGA donors. So let's just say that every time that someone tries to do it. What I think is more insidious and dangerous are some of these organizations that market themselves as, sadly, just as progressive organizations where, we're not really taking a side. We're in favor of democracy, and they use, all of the buzzwords. And maybe I'm saying too much, but I got an approach from one of these organizations to speak, and I declined it. And they said, why? And I said, well, I'll tell you what, let me just ask you this. Can you tell me that your organization supports Joe Biden's reelection and opposes Trump? And unless the answer to that question is yes, I'm not going to speak to your organization. And they never got back to me. So, they want to talk about democracy, and they want to talk about liberty, and they want to talk about all of this kind of stuff, but they don't want to talk about supporting Joe Biden. And that's a dead giveaway that they're not interested in a solution. Now, the things that some of these organizations are talking about are important. And an example that I've used in the past is that suppose a house is on fire and you need to put out the fire. And somebody knocks on your door, you're a neighbor, and says, that house that's on fire right now, the foundation, it needs to be bolted down, and we need to fix the floor joists and all of that. And in normal times, you'd say, yeah, those things make sense. And, I'll help out my neighbor do that. But the house is on fire. Put out the fire first. And then talk to people about rebuilding the infrastructure. And don't do it as a way to distract people from putting out the fire or supporting Joe Biden.
I thought, to your point, I thought it was interesting that Ralph Nader, who ran as a third party back in 2000 and may probably cost the Democrats the election, is now endorsing Joe Biden and said it's very important that there not be a third party candidate this time.
And I would just say this. Shame on Joe Manchin. Shame on, RFK Jr. Shame on Andrew Yang. Shame on everyone who wants to use this, Cornel West, who wants to use this moment for self-promotion because they know there is disaffection out there that they can use to increase their number of Twitter followers or write a book or, run for mayor of New York City or something like that. Shame on them. We are in an existential moment for our democracy. And I believe we will endure even if Trump wins. But shame on them for trying to convert that disaffection into personal aggrandizement. And that's what they are trying to do.
Thank you. So despite all that President Biden has done in terms of growing and stabilizing our economy, there seems to be just a lack of confidence that persists, and whether it's because of the cost or lack of housing, gas prices, climate, job instability, or other factors, how can we help people have more confidence in what President Biden has demonstrated is his clear ability to steer the economy successfully?
That's an excellent question. And let's recognize that for the past year and a half, the media has been telling us that a recession is around the corner. And you cannot tell me that has not affected people's outlook on how they feel, how secure they feel in their job, how secure they feel in sending their kids to college or educating themselves. So this question is coming after a year and a half of the recession's right around the corner. The recession's right around the corner. It's not. Now, I'm starting to see articles in major media outlets that say, we may have been wrong about that recession thing being right around the corner. So that's point one. Point two is that, and this is just between us, I don't want anyone else to repeat this, okay, even though it's on recording. Presidents really can't control the economy. They can't make jobs. They can't lose jobs. They can't increase GDP. They can't decrease GDP, except in extraordinary circumstances. But what happens is that presidents become the surrogate. They're the vessel into which people pour their concern and anxiety about the economy. The economy is the result of trillions of individual interactions that go into creating jobs and GDP. And there's precious little presidents can do about that, with one exception. And that's Joe Biden. I mean, he really did do something that is affecting the economy. He pumped billions, hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars into long-term infrastructure projects. And that will and has affected the economy. But here's the downside. It's a long-term investment. You can't turn the economy on a dime. I mean, when people complain about the price of gas, Joe Biden, no president has ever had the ability to control the price of gas. Sadly, that's a function of a global petroleum market that is controlled by monopolists. So, but people, it's hard to make that connection between what I pay at the gas pump and what Joe Biden has done in making an unprecedented investment in our infrastructure, in our climate, in our green energy, in bringing jobs back to America, bringing semiconductor jobs back to America. But those investments, take time. And he has been hampered by both some Democrats and Republicans. So let me give you an example. He was out at the picket line today at UAW. And one of the things that the UAW is concerned about is that the switch to EV vehicles will drive jobs away from their home states to southern states that have anti-union legislation that pay lower wages. And Trump is saying, aha, Biden's trying to, convert everything over to electric vehicles, and that threatens your jobs. Well, the reason it may threaten their jobs is, one, the automakers are moving their facilities to red states, but two, in the original Build Back Better legislation, Joe Biden anticipated this conundrum and had a $4,500 or $5,000 tax credit for electric vehicles built at union plants. And that is enough of a credit to affect someone's buying decision. But that provision was pulled out by the action of one senator, Joe Manchin. So now Biden is down with the UAW, supporting their cause, but he has one arm tied behind his back because his own party, Joe Manchin and maybe others, wouldn't support that tax credit. And of course, the tax credit is something that the Republicans want to repeal. So this is a hard nut to crack. And the reason it's a hard nut to crack is because it's easy to lie. It's easier to spread disinformation. You say whatever you want. It's harder to tell a fact-based truth because you have to talk about the facts. And that takes longer than 5 seconds. It may take 2 minutes. And so I come back around to you being the messengers of what Joe Biden has done in conversations where you listen more than you talk, but where you get around to the facts, like I just said, which is, yeah, Joe Biden's promoting electric vehicles, and he wants those EVs to be built in union plants, but the Republicans and Joe Manchin stopped him from doing that. Those are the facts. It's not that Joe Biden wants to take EV vehicles out of union plants. It's that the Republicans want that. By the way, they're probably going to allow 12-year-old kids to work on those EVs, down in some southern states that are repealing child labor laws.
You've touched on this already tonight, but I want to just kind of reiterate or ask this question. We had in Oregon here a GOP state senator called our democracy a, quote, tyranny of the majority in a comments he made, which is, very interesting. And of course, Trump has gone off the deep end calling for the execution of General Milley. He's threatened to imprison his enemies if he's elected. How can we get people to believe there is a real threat to our democracy if Trump, or really many of the current GOP, are elected or reelected?
Again, a great question, and it's hard because on the day when Trump threatened General Milley with death, that was a below the fold, for those of you who still read newspapers, that was a below the fold story. It was probably a Section C story in most newspapers. And the next day when he threatened MSNBC and NBC and all of the fake media, that just wasn't covered. So far as, it was covered in a few kind of specialty outlets like Talking Points Memo, and some focused on the media. But the press has just collapsed in its obligation to talk about what Trump is really saying, and not to paraphrase it, not to say, Trump threatens General Milley. Post what he said. And actually, Josh Marshall on Talking Points Memo has an editorial blog today about how should the media cover Trump. And what he says is take out all the filters, stop doing the analysis, and say, Trump said he would try to shut down NBC and MSNBC. Here are his words. If he does that, then this will happen. Instead of, a lengthy meta-analysis about, where Trump places himself uniquely in the history of free speech or something like that. I mean, Josh's point is get to the point. Say what Trump said. Now, that's hard because a lot of people is like, enough with Trump. I don't want to know what he's posting on Truth Social. And I guess I just have to say, I understand that and I'm sorry. But for this moment in our history, you have to pay attention. You have to know what he says because he means it. It's not metaphorical. It's not, some oblique threat. I mean, it's January 6th, be there. It will be wild. He knew what he meant. He knew at that point in time that there was going to be an assault on the Capitol. And so when he calls for the death penalty for General Milley or to shut down MSNBC or threatens Jack Smith or Judge Chutkan, there's an urgency there. Now, I'm drifting from the question of what do we do about that? And what I would say is we have to be able to do two things at once. We have to stop treating Trump as if he's a legitimate candidate for the presidency and tell everyone we know that he, not as I was going to say budding fascist, he is a fascist. And readers have corrected me frequently to say that the correct way to describe Trump is fascism or a fascist. And I believe that we have to tell people that he's coming for your rights. He's going to turn the DOJ into his private police force, or at least he's going to try. He's going to try to turn the U.S. military into his private army. He will fail. But those are the things he is going to do because he has told us. So stop treating him like he is neck and neck with Joe Biden. No, he's not. He is a fascist who is trying to be elected president to avoid criminal prosecution. He's not neck and neck with Joe Biden. He is an existential threat to democracy. You have to say that to people. And if it offends them, it offends them. Secondly, after you speak that truth, you just have to get back to getting people out to vote. I mean, we are a kind of evenly divided electorate. This election will be determined by turnout. And hopefully people are worried about the Dobbs decision enough. They're worried about the destruction of the EPA. They're worried about gun safety. They're worried about the dignity of LGBTQ people. They're worried about the environment. And those things will drive people to the polls. And when they walk into the polling booth and they have those issues or some of those issues uppermost in mind, do you think they're going to say, well, Biden's old, Trump's crazy, but, maybe I'll just vote for Trump. What the heck? I don't think so. And I think that the special elections that have happened over the last 9 months have told us exactly that. That the voting models, the polls are not accounting for two things: greater turnout and the swing of independent voters and Republican-leaning voters over to the side of liberty, the side of democracy, to make a win. I mean, you look at what happened in the Wisconsin Supreme Court election with Justice Protasewicz. I mean, she won by 200,000 votes in a state where a margin of victory of 5,000 votes in a presidential election is incredible. She won by 200,000 votes. I mean, what does that say about how Biden's going to do in 2024? I think it's an extraordinarily good signal. So one, identify Trump for exactly the threat that he is, which is that he's a fascist, and two, then forget about it and go get people to the polls.
Thank you. That's a good note to end on. And I just want to give you a chance to make any last remarks or give us any last takeaways.
I think the only thing I will say is, I stumbled into this whole newsletter thing. I was a securities lawyer for 40 plus years. And what I had to do, I practiced before the SEC, and what I had to do had very little to do with most people's everyday lives. And so I started writing a newsletter. And as a result, thank you, COIN, for asking me to come and speak to you. It's wonderful. And I now find myself doing this 3 or 4 times a week. And it gives me a unique perspective because I've spoken to people in Alaska. I've spoken to farmers in Wisconsin who, by the way, are the most liberal Democrats you will ever meet in your life. In fact, the name of the party is the Farmers Something Socialist Democratic Party or something like that. I've spoken to people in Maine and Florida and Texas, and what I have in my head, this Zoom meeting mapped all over the map of the United States. There are other meetings like this with other advocates and volunteers like you who are doing this over and over and over again. That is not happening on the Republican side. There's a handful of people who are writing big checks to try to win elections through disinformation. I think our model is the better one. It worked in 2018, it worked in 2020, and it worked in 2022. So I leave every one of these meetings buoyed and more confident and more enthusiastic than when I came into them. I'm honored, befuddled, hopeful that my remarks have been helpful in some way. If not, I apologize for imposing on you, but thank you for taking the time to listen to what I have to say, and God bless you all for what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Robert. We really appreciate your time, and you've given us a lot to think about.
Okay.
Let's go off mute and clap for Robert.
Yay.
Hey, thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Learned a lot.
Albert, I see Albert Kaufman there, was one of my first readers a very long time ago when I was back on Constant Contact. He was kind enough to help me figure out how to use a program I had never used before. Thank you, Albert. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. And if your cabin ever really goes away, we'll find you a cabin in Oregon.
Okay.
Yay.
I'm going to sign off, everyone, and go
Thank
back
you.
to work on the newsletter. God bless you all. Thank you for
Thank you,
everything.
Robert.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Night.